Hey everyone, welcome back to JP's Budget Collecting and our weekly look back at the hot comics from 6 months ago. This week we're looking back at the hot comics from April 28th, 2023, and I'm recording this on October 27th, 2023. As always, I give you those dates so you know when this information is actually relevant because the market is always moving and changing, and as you'll see by these prices, even 6 months, you can have dramatic differences in the value of books, so you come back 6 months from now, and this video may not be quite as relevant as it was. So, as always, also, we're looking back at the CBSI Hot Top 10 and the Comic Tom Key Collector Hottest Trending Comics of the Week. Each week, they put out a list of 10 books that are moving in the market, that are going up in value, that are selling a lot of copies. And we use those two lists to see what was hot, what reasons made them hot, and see how they've responded to the market since, so we all make maybe better decisions about the books we chase in the moment versus the books we're patient on, by looking at those factors that made them hot versus the factors that maybe made them cool off since or kept them going. So with that, let's dig into this list and see if we can learn anything this week. First up, we have Ambassadors, number 1. This is another Mark Millar project that has been optioned. So, yeah, that caused us to jump up to a $15, $20 book. Millar projects being optioned do not have a strong history, even if they get made, of holding any kind of value. But this one jumped up because it got optioned. Now it's a $5 to $10 book. 9.8, literally $15 to $60. This is down in a trap already, and it hasn't even been made into a crappy show yet, which has been kind of the history of most Millar projects. So in general, option news good to avoid. Millar option news even better to avoid, or be patient on, I should say, at least. Next, we have Noctera, number 1. This has been optioned for a while, but they came back into the news 6 months ago because James Wan was attached to produce. This is still supposedly going to Netflix. Netflix also, much like Millar, has a checkered history on actually turning these into something that people really want to watch. But anyway, back then caused raw copies to jump back up to 18. But 9.8, the 9.8 sale right then was only going for 36, which is super cheap for a 9.8. So yeah, this book wasn't super hot back then. Kind of where this book is sat, just maybe more sales. Now raw copies are 10 to 15, so they backed up a little bit. 9.8s are 25 to 90, but most of the sales are in that 25 to like 50 range, with just a couple a little higher. So we're going to call this a steady I'll be back on the raw side and the 9.8 side, because they're could call it down, I'll be back. It's kind of borderline, but it's in kind of the same range for the most part. So that's what we're going to go with Noctera. With that, we're going to move in away from option news and into our covers for the week. First up, we have 5 Color Comics, number 1, from 2008. This kind of, anytime you put Nazi stuff on a cover, it's usually fairly controversial, but this is a hard to find Bruce Timm cover that's pretty desirable. Back then, there was multiple sales. They were going like $350 to $380 for this book. Apparently, it's not as hard to find as we thought, because now there's several listed and there's been several sales. And the most recent sales have been like $80 to $150. Now, these are all raw copies. So yeah, that's a dumpster fire. I get why a cover like that's somewhat desirable, but yeah, it has not held up value at all. Apparently not as rare as maybe people thought it was. All right, next we have Star Wars Yoda number 6, the Takashi Okazaki 1 in 25, on the list for the second week in a row. Last week it was a $50 to $65 book. It had that second week peak that we talk about that usually never holds. It jumped up to a $90 to $100 book. Now it's a $30 to $55 book, so it was even down from the first week heights. 9.8 will cost you $70 to $100, so you can get a 9.8 for exactly what you were paying back then for raw copies. Yeah, so that's a dumpster fire. It dropped more than 50% to under a $50 book from a basically $100 book. Yeah, not a good investment if you chase this in week 2. Now, I just said that the second week peak, always avoid. We're going to have a rare exception to that right now. We got She-Hulk number 12, the Ji-Hung Lee 1 in 100 Virgin variant. Last week when it was on, it was like $125 plus. And by week 2 hitting the list, we got that second week peak. It went up to a $175 to $200 book. So that's usually, okay, that's too high. You want to avoid that second week peak. Well, in this case, it's still a $200 to $225 book raw. Interestingly, 9.8s actually overlap with the upper end of the raw sales at $215 to $330. We're still going to call this an up in a straight cash book. So even if you bought in at $175 to $200, you're still doing really good. You're at least worth it, if not straight cash, on being able to get your value back out of this book. That's pretty rare for a book that does that second week peak thing. All right, next we have Strange Academy Finals, number 6, the Scotty Young 1 in 25. Scotty doesn't get a ton of incentives, but he does get a few. This 1 in 25 was going for 90 to 100, which actually is usually a good sign on a 1 in 25. Usually if a 1 in 25 gets above triple, pushing quadruple ratio, that usually means it has a pretty good chance of holding, or at least it used to. It seems like that rule has kind of broken down recently. Less consistency there in the last 6-10 months than there used to be over the first few years we were doing this. Because this one is now a $30 to $50 book. 9.8, $65 to $100. Yeah, this is a dumpster fire. This book is back way up, and has not held that higher initial value, even though usually that higher initial value is a good sign. All right, with that, we're going to move into a little comic buzz. We didn't have a ton of covers this week. We have Deadly Neighborhood Spider-Man, number 5, the first appearance of Dream Spider. Basically, this is a new version of a Spider character, was going to be part of the Edge of the Spider-Verse books that were coming out, and then whatever the new crossover event was about to begin. Back then, raw copies were going for $15, 9.8 hit $100. Now it's a $5 to $20 book, 9.8, $35 to $55. So dumpster fire on at 9.8, but the vast majority of sales are raw copies, and they've down a little bit. So we're going to call it down and I'll be back just based on the raw sales, but obviously 9.8, you can do much better here than you could back then. All right, next, we actually have an older book on the list. We haven't had many of those yet so far. Uncanny XMen number 141 from 1981, the start of the Days of Future Past storyline. And this was hitting the list because we got solicitations for a prequel to the Days of Future Past event was coming from Marvel. I don't know if it's actually started coming out yet or not, but should have if it was solicited 6 months ago, or maybe they were talking about it, but I don't remember if it's actually coming out. But anyway, we're getting a prequel comic to Days of Future Past. Caused us to hit the list. Raw copies of 125 average, 9.8, 1,080. Now it's a 40 to 150 book raw, 9.8, 800 to 900. So just a little bit of a step back, kind of back to where the book really sits normally. So we got just a slight bump with this news, and we got a slight step back. So it's a down and I'll be back, but really it just returned to what its long-term value is. All right, next we have Star Wars, The High Republic Adventures, Quest of the Jedi, number 1. This was a book that got delayed several times, but was part of the big phase 2 of Star Wars, The High Republic. Had multiple first appearances. I didn't write down the names here. And yeah, was a $20 to $30 book right out of the gate because, we're introducing all kinds of Star Wars characters. Well, we've already moved past phase 2. We don't know if we're ever going to see many of these characters again. And yeah, this is now a $5 to $15 book, 25 to 60 on a 9.8. So yeah, that's a trap. Borderline dumpster fire. Yeah, this book is back way up, and yeah, was something that was definitely worth being patient on, which has been the case with all the High Republic books. You can go back and get all of them now for much cheaper than they've been throughout most of this process since they started coming out. We'll see if phase 3 has enough in it as it's just getting kicked off to kind of bring these back up and bring these characters back to the forefront and raise the value of some of those phase 1 and phase 2 books. We'll see. All right, with that, we're going to move into DC movie stuff. And first up, we have Flashpoint number 1. I think we got the final Flash movie trailer at this point is what was going on back then. Raw copies were going for $35, 9.8, $290. And since then, the Flash movies gone, and kind of bombed at the box office. Now it's a $5 to $25 book. 9.8, $220, but that's only one sale, so it didn't back up as much as the Raw side did. Most of those Raw sales are around $10 from $35. So this is a dumpster fire, and definitely a book that's backed way, way up. This movie, it was only a very loose interpretation of the Flashpoint event, and B, so usually because of that, these storyline books don't hold very well after the movie comes and goes, and then B, the movie wasn't super successful. So, all right, next we have Static, #1, the first appearance of Static Shock. This is technically the regular cover, and not the orange one is different, but anyway, back then 9.8 of this was hitting 220 after James Gunn indicated that Static would be a part of the new DC movieverse at some point, so that's what caused this book to hit the list. Now it's a $15 to $35 book raw. 9.8, 100 to 200. So went down and I'll be back. Hasn't backed up a ton. It's borderline trap on the low end, obviously, of those 9.8s, but there's enough sales all throughout the $100 to $200 range that we just left it as an I'll be back. All right, we have only one MCU book this week to talk about, and that is Guardians of the Galaxy Annual #1, the first appearance of Kruger, who was a character that we had seen at the end of Guardians 2 with the Ravagers, and we were going to see in Guardians 3, or at least they thought that. Caused this book to spike in sales. This was a Tom book that spiked in sales, but not really necessarily in value. Raw copies were only going for a $7 average. 9.8 hit 100 though. And we did see the character again in Guardians, but again, it was just kind of a side background character that really didn't play any kind of significant role. Raw copies were $1 to $8 now. 9.8, 50. Yeah, this is down in a trap. Just not a lot of here. I mean, yes, the character appeared in the movie, but no, the character wasn't necessarily important to the movie. All right, with that, we're going to move into the Sony side of Marvel movies, or at least the Spider-Man side that Sony controls. We got Venom Lethal Protector #4, the first appearance of Scream. This is hitting the list because there were casting rumors. The Scream is going to be in Venom 3. Who knows when we're going to get Venom 3? I can't believe we're getting a Venom 3 given how bad the first two were, but whatever. Sony just cranking out these Spider movies because they want to keep the rights and make Disney keep having to pay them. Because if they stop, then the rights revert back to Disney. So that's what's going on there, basically. But anyway, raw copies back then were going for $30. 9.8 hitting 70, which is actually down from some of the peaks this book had hit previously. Now it's a $5 to $25 book raw, with most of the sales 10 to 15-ish. 9.8, 7,100. So 9.8s are kind of steady up maybe a little bit. There was a 9.8 sale for 200, but it was clearly an outlier. All the other sales were 70 to 100. We're going to call this down in a trap because the vast majority of the sales were raw copies, and they did follow that. But obviously 9.8s have stayed pretty steady to worth it, in their sales at least for this book. All right, next we have Web of Spider-Man #36, the first appearance of Tombstone. So rumors were we were still getting this El Muerto movie, which is all you need to know about Sony's Spider-Verse, and that Tombstone potentially was going to be the villain, so it caused raw copies of this book to hit $20, 9.8 hit all the way up to $3.25. Now it's a $5 to $25 book, so down and I'll be back for sure on the raw side, which is most of the sales. 9.8, 240 to 400, but only one sale. That $400 sale is the only sale above the previous $325. All the other sales are $300 or under. So we're going to call this, again, a down and I'll be back based on those, is that $400 is a bit of an outlier in terms of value on a 9.8. So we'll look at all the other sales and say down and I'll be back on this first appearance of Tombstone. All right, 3 books left. We got Web of Spider-Man 118, first appearance of Ben Reilly as Scarlet Spider. This actually just hit the current list like a week ago, or last week when I talked about it. So this book, unsurprisingly, is steady and worth it. Back then it was $100, 9.8 going for $600 to $700, as we were wrapping up some of the Scarlet Spider events that he'd been part of, Dark Web and all this kind of stuff. And this was really about the Andy Samberg news that he was the voice in Across the Spider-Verse. So that's really what was causing this book to hit the list back then. So $100 raw, $600 to $700 for 9.8. Now it's still basically a $100 book raw on average, 9.8, $721. So it's been pretty steady and worth it. It stayed kind of right in this same range for sure. All right, 2 more books to go, both related to the Kraven movie and the trailer we got. Amazing Spider-Man number 41, the first appearance of Rhino. Back then, a 6.0 hit 650, an 8.0 hit 1400, a 9.2 hit 3600, and yet Tom said the average was 27, whatever. But anyway, so those were kind of sale prices for where Rhino was at back then. Raw copies now are $100 to $500. There was one raw copy that was way, way more, but it was a really, really nice copy. But all the rest of them were basically $100 to $500. 6.0 will cost you $500 to $675, so down a little bit on the range of the 6.0. 8.0 down to $1,050. So this book is backed up, and that's pretty consistent across grades as I kind of looked at this. It's not like turned into a trap, but it has taken a little bit of a step back from that trailer that we were for sure trailer confirmation that we were getting Rhino. We'll see if this Kraven movie is any good, but another down and I'll be back. And then our last book is Amazing Spider-Man 15, the first appearance of Kraven. Obviously the trailer is why this hit the list. But CBSI didn't give any prices this week on the Kraven, and as you've noticed, I don't know if you've noticed or not, I didn't say anything, but I haven't given any JP predictions. This was a week I did not do a cash or trash, so I didn't write anything down back then. I did look at values, but I didn't add them to the list. I just was going to be clear about what I was going off of here. But I did look kind of at Go Collect and cover price to see what the trends were on these books over the last 6 months across some grades. Raw copies right now are $300 to $1,500. $300 to $1,500 for a raw copy. 4.5 will cost you $750 to $850. 6.0 will cost you $1,050. So this is a book that has definitely stayed pretty steady. I mean, this has actually been steady and worth it. It hasn't jumped up anymore, but based on the trends I could see on Go Collect and cover price, books stayed pretty steady in these ranges. So this one's been pretty steady with the movie coming. So we'll see, again, if this Kraven movie does anything. My fear is this movie might be the best time to buy this. Book might be about 3 months after the movie if it's bad. So see what happens. With that, I want to thank you guys for watching, and we will catch you next time.